Okay, it's the Rams up now. They're on the clock. All right, now it's the Raiders' turn. They're up. The Vikings are now on the clock. All right, now it's the Cardinals' turn. They're up. All right, next up, the Titans are on the clock. Okay, it's the Lions now on the clock. On the clock now, the Jaguars. All right, the Packers are now on the clock. Okay, it's the Bucks now on the clock. Okay, it's the Patriots on the clock now. And now we turn to the Jets. It's their selection. The Bills on the clock now. What direction will they go? Now we turn to the Eagles. They're on the clock. And the Giants now on the clock. Who do they have their eye on? The Steelers are now on the clock. And now we turn to the WFT. It's their selection. All right, the Seahawks are now on the clock. All right, the Bears are now on the clock. Okay, the Texans up now. They're on the clock. Okay, next up, it's the Broncos on the clock. The Cowboys on the clock now. What direction will they go? All right, next up, the Colts are on the clock. All right, it's the Browns now on the clock. All right, on the clock now, the Saints. Now the Dolphins are on the clock. Who do they have their eye on? The Chiefs on the clock now. All right, now on the clock, the Rams. Okay, here we go. The Raiders now on the clock. Okay, here we go. The Vikings on the clock now. The Cardinals are now on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Titans. All right, on the clock now, the Lions. Okay, the Jaguars are now on the clock. Now the Packers are on the clock. Who do they have their eye on? All right, next up, the Patriots are on the clock. All right, next up, the Jets are on the clock. And now we turn to the Bengals. It's their selection. Okay, the Eagles on the clock now. Okay, the Giants up now. They're on the clock. And the Steelers on the clock now. Let's see what direction they go. All right, the Ravens are now on the clock. Now the Seahawks are on the clock. Who do they have their eye on? On the clock now, it's the Texans. The time is ticking. All right, next up, the Falcons are on the clock. It's the Cowboys now on the clock. Now we turn to the Panthers. They're on the clock. Okay, here we go. The Colts now on the clock. Okay, the Browns on the clock now. The Dolphins now on the clock. And now on the clock, it's the 49ers. On the clock now, the Chiefs. And the Rams now on the clock. Who do they have their eye on? The Vikings on the clock now. What direction will they go? The Titans now on the clock. It's the Lions now on the clock. All right, the Jaguars are now on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Packers, and time is ticking. The Patriots are now on the clock. The Jets now on the clock. Let's see what they do. It's the Bills now on the clock. Okay, here we go. The Bengals now on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Giants, and time is ticking. The Chargers now on the clock. All right, it's the Steelers now on the clock. All right, next up, the football team on the clock. The Seahawks are on the clock now. The Texans are now on the clock. Okay, it's the Falcons now on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Broncos, and time is ticking. Okay, the Panthers on the clock now. The Colts are now on the clock. And the Browns on the clock now. Let's see what direction they go in. On the clock now, it's the Dolphins. Time is ticking. The Chiefs are up now. Let's see what direction they go. The Raiders on the clock now. What direction will they go? All right, it's now the Vikings' turn. They're up. Now we turn to the Steelers. They're on the clock. The Titans on the clock now. Let's see who they have their eye on. The Jaguars are up now. Let's see what direction they go in. On the clock now, it's the Buccaneers. The Patriots on the clock right now. Let's see who they have their eye on. Okay, it's the Bills now on the clock. All right, next up, the Bengals are on the clock. The Eagles are now on the clock. All right, now on the clock, the Giants. Okay, the Chargers up now. They're on the clock. Okay, the Steelers on the clock now. Football team now on the clock. Let's see what they do. The Ravens are now on the clock. Okay, next up, it's the Seahawks on the clock. On the clock now, the Bears. All right, now on the clock, the Texans. On the clock now, it's the Falcons. The Broncos are on the clock now. The Cowboys now on the clock. All right, it's the Panthers now on the clock. The Colts now on the clock. Let's see what they do. Now we turn to the Browns. They're on the clock. Okay, next up, it's the Dolphins on the clock. The 49ers now on the clock. All right, the Chiefs are now on the clock. The Rams on the clock now. The Raiders now on the clock. And now on the clock, it's the Vikings. And now on the clock, it's the Cardinals. Okay, it's the Titans now on the clock. The Lions on the clock now. Okay, here we go. The Cardinals now on the clock. Next up, the Titans are on the clock. The Lions on the clock now. What direction will they go? The Cardinals on the clock now. What direction will they go? On the clock now, it's the Titans. Okay, it's the Lions now on the clock.